Good morning, Bob.
Morning. How are you, Mona?
I'm great. I would like you to I'm going to introduce you, and you're from the Wamtastic Club that was formed in 2010. And I understood you had a friend that kept asking you to come to Toastmasters. And finally you thought, oh, let me try it out. And so you came to Toastmasters. And also, what I've understood is that you had somebody that approached you if you wanted a mentor. It was Peter who said, "I'd like to be your mentor. Would you like a mentor?" And you said yes.
That's right.
And this is I just want to move along in the sense of tell us a little bit of that experience of you being reluctant to coming in and you and your mentor coming together. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I always thought that I had pretty good communication and leadership skills. I was already a division manager. I'd done a lot of presentations. But Danielle, the lady who coerced me into joining, was kind of after me. And so she must have seen something that needed some improvement. So I went. I enjoyed the first meeting. I connected with the people. I saw it as a social group. And then I saw the evaluation stuff that they did and felt like, okay, I get it. Maybe there's some place for me. And then I started attending every meeting as a guest, as the timer, right? We always start off, if you're a guest and you're not quite a new member and they want to put you into a role, you start off with your timing buttons and make. So that was really cool. I saw that I had a role, and then it didn't take me long to decide to join.
So as you got moving along, and then Peter approached you about being a mentor. Tell us about that.
So Peter is one of the senior guys at the company where Wamtastic was, a senior engineer. We knew each other fairly well. I'd worked on some projects with him. And like you said, he approached me. He said, so I'd like to be your mentor if you'd like that. This is what I bring as a mentor. And of course, he's an engineer and I'm an engineer wannabe. And I thought that we could make a pretty good pair. And so he sat with me as we went through a couple of the first speeches that I did, some fun stuff. But I did that thing where I wrote out the whole speech and he and I would go through it and try and adjust the language a little bit. And then as the speeches went on, I started to get more comfortable and I started to change how I would approach. And Peter was so happy to work with me in that form. So yeah, just take it and run with it. You don't need notes every time. You can go with a cue card or put your notes up at the back of the room so that people can't see it, but you can, if that helps. And so it was kind of about notes, but it was more about mentoring, what I was going to get out of Toastmasters and leadership and to become a good communicator and to step into a Toastmaster role. That was really scary the first time I did that. But it wasn't timer anymore. This was at the front of the room for much of the meeting, introducing people, introducing speeches, and getting comfortable with what I had to present and share. And Peter and I actually built a good relationship out of that. He and I are good friends, lifelong friends, based on our stuff that we did in Toastmasters.
You know, it sounds like that your relationship went in the sense of where you were at. That mentor was really listening to you, and you started out with a bit of a structure, but then as time went along, he flowed with where you were going and how you wanted to do it. And he just gave you feedback and support and guidance, however you needed it more than anything. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, and it wasn't just about the speeches anymore. It was about what were my goals in Toastmasters, because once I joined and stepped into it fully, I didn't see a reason to leave. The social aspect was fantastic. The fact that I can stand here in front of Mona and do a podcast about my Toastmasters experience is part of that. I got the opportunity to speak at club competitions and be a guest speaker at a couple of places. And all of that was based on those first few months of encouragement from Peter and others in the club, and feeling like I could step into it and really own my experience.
That is great. And I'm hearing you say it wasn't always just Toastmasters that, learning a speech and doing all that, but it was that social aspect. And, with what we've been going through in the last year or more, would you say that's a big asset today?
Oh, the whole relationship piece. The fact that we're on Zoom all the time. I had a friend and I went for a walk and we talked about Zoom fatigue. And I said, well, yes and no. I still get the opportunity to connect with people, and this feels real. It's not just a screen. I'm not watching TV. I'm actually talking to you and you're talking to me, and we're building a relationship. I have no problem with Zoom in that way. The other part of that is it was really relationship building. We did things as a club that we would go on raft rides and all kinds of stuff, right? Meet in the park, try different things, meet at people's houses and do speech competitions, hang out for a barbecue in a backyard. So it was much more than just the 1 or 2 hour meeting once a week, learning how to do speeches and speechcraft. It had a life of its own and became a really good social club. And that's how we introduced Whamtastic to people too. But this is a really comfortable place to come.
Sounds like fun. And that's so much part of what's important today. We can have that fun. So Bob, I know that that a lot of us are working on the mentoring piece. I'm a big believer in mentoring, and I had a mentor when I first started, and boy, what an impact that made on me in my very early stages of over 25 years ago. And it was amazing. What was the reason that you approached us and said, hey, I'd like to talk about mentoring? Because you guys are formed a group of you, area directors, and are also our district director and everything are talking about mentoring, but you approached us, and what was the reason you felt you wanted to talk about this?
My experience has been so amazing. I've had mentors throughout my career as a draftsman and an artist. But one of my mentors, once Peter had determined he was done with me, I was good. Very on. I started working with Shelley Goldbeck. I don't know if you know her. She's a DTM, has 3 DTMs. Oh my gosh. And she took me on as a mentee and has been amazing. Like second to none. She would work with me and we would get together before meetings and after meetings to do evaluation of my role as a Toastmaster or whatever I was doing. We talk about the speeches and then we'd just build a friendship.
Wow.
And so that was one piece, was the mentoring for me, but also they pushed me to take on junior people in the Toastmasters Club as well. And so I've been mentoring people since year 2, I guess, or year 3.
Wow.
Where new members would come in and I'd do the same thing that Peter did with me. We'd work through the speeches, we'd talk about everything, and I would just encourage them to step out of their comfort zone a little bit, do what they needed to, and help them to set goals so that they could get the most out of their Toastmasters experience.
It sounds like there's a bit of a flow to how you mentor. And, I know people have mentioned the time factor, how much time is involved. Can you speak a little bit on what that time frame looks like to you?
Sure. That's a great question. So Peter was able to spend some time, but it was pretty prescriptive. Like I said, we're both from that engineering role, but when Shelley stepped in, it became more about the relationship and what she could give and bring to me. I learned from her every step of the way. So I was in the competent communicator manual at that point, working on speech 7 to 10 kind of range. And so they were higher level speeches, and she would help correct some more of that language, making sure I'm getting the right word and the right tone, making sure I was pausing effectively. And that, I know that's a bit of a coaching thing and not a mentoring thing. But one of the things that she brought was, well, when you speak, what kind of impact do you want to make on the audience that's listening to you? Whether you're talking about Pokemon Go or geocaching or drone flying or some other leadership aspect of your role as an engineer or a draftsman or whatever I was doing at the time, the intent was to get across a message. And that was Shelley's take. And she's a great messenger. Oh my gosh. She does all kinds of things, from her cowboy poetry to writing books and stories and speaking at all kinds of events. She's a sought out speaker. And so as a mentor, she was a terrific match for me.
You know, it's interesting. I think lots of times with the mentoring, what is involved is like having a conversation and getting some tips and getting some ideas of what to do different, just to improve on that. And that could be, you know, just even after the meeting, that you could have that 5, 10, 15-minute little chat or whatever, and maybe have other calls here and there. But really, it's so organic of how it flows is what I'm hearing from you.
That's right. Can I give you one great example of one of the things that Shelley brought?
Yes.
We talked through one of my speeches and she said, okay, Bob, well, that's good. I think you've kind of got a point there and you're making it. But imagine if you could turn that into an event instead of a speech. Oh, right? That language changed everything.
Wow. Wow. You know, and it's those little tips that make a huge difference. And really, that's what it's all about. Now, I know that the club has had ups and downs in your journey as a club. And can you tell us a little bit of what the down looked like and how did you get out of that down spot and move forward?
There was a lot of pain and tears, I think. When COVID hit, we had a lot of people who were pretty quickly went through Zoom fatigue. We had some really great senior members of the team. And then one by one, they left our group for good reasons. But we went from 18, 19 people down to 7.
Wow.
And that was exhausting for the 7 that were left. Every meeting was taking on 2 or 3 roles, trying to keep things going, trying to keep things upbeat, managing the agenda all the time. And it became a real chore. I think it was hard on everybody. And then I would say, well, it was a few months of that. But then Camila took on a role of public relations VP. And Camila's been fantastic. I can't say enough about this woman. She started us on Meetup. She connected us through Facebook. She started doing open houses. Between her and the group of 7 of us that were there, we just kind of committed to this thing. We were at a point where we were actually going to disband Whamtastic and join another club. That's how kind of desperate and hard it was.
Wow.
And we had that one meeting where we said, you know what, let's try some things and to bring in new members. And really it was about membership at the time. The relationships were solid. We had really good connections with our former members and our club coach, Michelle, who also was ready to move on to different things. She'd coached us really well. And then things started to improve. We had a couple of members come back. Our meetups were working. We were getting 1 or 2 or 3 guests in every meeting. Our Facebook page was constantly updated. The members, the group that was there, really kicked in and put in as much effort as was needed to build up the group. Now we're up to 14 members. We're probably adding 2 more in the next week. We're probably going to go back to meeting every week. We'd actually gone to meet every 2 weeks just because it was exhausting.
Right.
Weekly.
So it sounds like you made adjustments, but you as the group that were left decided, okay, what is the one thing we're going to focus on? And you focused on the PR. As you said, the relationships were already there. And then it went to, it's not, like Camille saying, okay, I can do this. So going to a strength is what I'm hearing and doing this. And then it just let it flow from there, and everybody just welcome people as they come in and so forth, and you're growing. And I liked when you said we just went down to every 2 weeks. It was every 2 weeks?
That's right.
Rather than every week, just to kind of give us that energy build up again. So good for you guys to do that. What would what do you think is sustaining you the most now throughout? Like, you're doing very well and it's growing. What's sustaining that growth?
Well, new members bring a lot of energy into the group. I think of one of our new members, Janice. She was a guest for 4 or 5 meetings. She did the timer role. She started to step up and take on a couple little roles. Of course, as a smaller group, we would ask guests to take on what they could. And we would always try and coerce them into becoming members, of course. I think part of that is Camila is a pretty good salesperson. And so is Lorianne. They would just kind of say, well, what do you think about joining us? Here's the fee structure. And that it was a no pressure club. You could join and you didn't have to attend every meeting. And if you did attend every meetings, you didn't have to always take on a role. You could sit and observe and see how it went. That was part of it. But I would say the new members bring a lot of energy. We have a new member, Stephen No, his speeches are fantastic. He brings leadership. He asked me and I asked him, we kind of approach each other at the same time to take on that mentorship role. But I've got a lot to learn from the guy. And that's, I think, one of the big things about mentoring is it's really a two-way thing. Peter taught me that long ago. He and I learned from each other and would bring things to the meeting or to life that were what we'd learned from each other.
And that is a really great point, Bob, is mentorship isn't just a mentor and a mentee. It's that relationship, and that you do learn from each other, because there's so many skills that each individual brings. And even if you are chosen to be the mentor, or you offer to be a mentor, yes, that's a role, but you're learning too along the way, which is the impact. That's what this is all about, isn't it?
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not every meeting is all wonderful. Sometimes there's bumps, right? Sometimes the leadership has to step in and say, oh, that was a really harsh evaluation. Let's work with that member who just got a little bit of lots of points of improvement and not very much joy.
Right.
So then we would work with the evaluators and say, let's change the balance of that a little bit.
Yeah. You brought in leadership, and you've mentioned it several times, and it sounds like your club is has leadership very much a focal point of how you're stepping into leadership roles and mentoring. They seem to go side by side. Can you tell us how that mentoring and leadership is tied together?
You've got some doozer of questions, don't you? So right now I'm president of Whamtastic. I've gone through the number of roles. I was VP of PR and education, and I've learned some of the leadership stuff from our club coaches who work directly with us. So Michelle and Ed were fantastic as club coaches when we needed them most. And the leadership piece, part of it is getting people to step up and take on their own role. So when I think about Camila and what she's done as a PR, just giving her rope, go, do, and see what happens, right, is part of that. Because
Right.
we could have said no. We could have backed off and said, we don't really want to get involved in Meetup. There's a cost involved.
Mm.
Facebook, mm, does that mean that we have to log into Facebook every week and say good things about stuff? And she was encouraging. She's the right person for the job.
Wow.
Another aspect of that, if I could just give one more
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
is all of us took on new roles in the last couple of years, right? So we have Fernando, who's our VP of Education. And sometimes that's a really critical role in the club. And it's also one of those things where you're following up with people continually along their pathways to see where they're at, to help them along if they struggle with getting through that next level or figuring out how pathways works and taking that next step to get a speech into the agenda. Fernando's been really good at kind of just coaxing people along. I think it's a good role for him because he wants to see people improve.
Wow.
For me, from the leadership aspect, this president role means that I'm involved a little bit more with the area directors, a little bit more with how area competitions and club competitions go, and making sure that we're well represented and that we're working on our distinguished club point stuff. But I also get to work with this great team and see them at their strength.
Right. And I understand it was one of the ADs that was talking to you about mentor. Who was that?
Ruby, I would say not just a friend, but also a mentor. Mm-hmm. I would follow her anywhere. She's been fantastic at coaxing me along. I think she does that with everyone she touches. She will see you, Mona, and go, "Oh, what can I get out of you?" Right? And she's unabashed. She will just step in and take leadership. She encouraged me to step into a Toastmaster role in one of the club competitions, and just so encouraging. There was a role that I'd not done before at an area level, and she's, "You can do it, you can do it," and she's just encouraging, right? But then she gave me all of these little tips and tricks, and make sure you have some filler content for when there's a blank space, and
right.
And things went so well, and she says, "So you're one of my go-to people now." And you know how that feels to step into a role that you were unsure about and have someone encourage you like that?
I think that speaks highly and good for Ruby to see that potential in you. And lots of times it is others who see potential in you where you're hesitant, and what it does is it boosted you to think somebody believed in me, and you just go out there and just give it whatever you can and all, and you've learned from that experience. And gosh, it does pump you up and give you that boost. And I think that's what this is all about: relationship, mentorship, leadership, it all. And even in our personal lives, wouldn't you say it just falls into that personal life? How does that affect you in your work and personal life, Bob? All of this.
Oh my gosh, right? So one of my mantras is say yes to good things. Oh, and that has changed my life. But it does make me a little scared of what Ruby's going to ask next of me. I don't know what's coming.
Well, isn't it? I see you light up even when you say that. So I know it's all good. What would you say to a club that is struggling and they're not sure about mentoring? And you've certainly given us a big insight. What would you say is the first little step that you can take to build your club and get things rolling?
So many little steps that you could do. So for us, it was a big step to go to meeting bi-weekly instead of weekly. I think make sure that each person has somebody that's a partner to them, a mentor or mentee relationship.
Yep.
And that your people who are senior in your club have mentors, even if they're outside of the club. And in fact, especially if they're outside of the club. Having Ruby as a mentor has changed things for me and for my club.
Wow.
And I would encourage that for everybody to have that coaching and mentoring relationship with someone. And when they're at the senior place in the club, they're one of the top 3 that's been there a long time, find someone outside the club that can help you along.
These are great tips, Bob, that you're giving us. And so it isn't always on the senior mentors to kind of figure all these things out. It's bring in that team of people, whoever they are in group, and let's brainstorm and let's be open to ideas and let's just try things and see what comes out of it. Just let it go and go with a whole new concept and do what fits for the club at that time. And then I heard you had a coach as well. So that added to it. A coach came in, it's like an athlete, they have coaches, and that's what helps them, is to have that coach to help them along and everything else. So I guess your word of wisdom is, and for mentoring, because this is something that we've been focusing on and everything. And I know for myself, I have mentors right now in my life, and I have gained so much. And what would you think would happen if mentorship wasn't a part of our program?
Well, I know for me, if Peter hadn't taken me on, I would have probably struggled more in that first year, around really feeling like I was contributing something, that I was learning and growing. Now, that's not for sure. Part of my personality is I'm going to seek out some help. But I think for people, they can get isolated pretty quickly.
Yes.
Especially in a club like this. If we don't match somebody to a new guest or a new member, I think we're missing out on a whole bunch of opportunity to, sure, there's coaching, but we always say, you get out of Toastmasters what you put into it. And if you've got a mentor who's kind of pushing you a little bit out of your comfort zone, and encouraging you to just take what's the next step for you in Toastmasters, I think that is one of the big contributors to that mentor-mentee relationship. What's next? What's next? Help you to set goals and then see them achieved. We're not all going to become DTMs, but we are going to get something out of this in terms of our leadership and communication. And even if that's just removing the ums and ahs and so's, or figuring out how long it actually takes to give a short introduction for someone and not ramble on forever, or say too little. I think those are some of the really simple things that we learn at Toastmasters that comes from that mentoring relationship.
Bob, I want to thank you very, very much. Ruby was smart to ask you and talk to you, and you just willingly just said, hey, I'd talk about this. Thank you for stepping in and taking that leadership role to really show how impactful mentoring is. And you've given us so many tips. And thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Mona, for sitting with me and talking this through and taking time to listen.
Yes.
You're such a good active listener. And you ask the hard questions. Oh my gosh. Keep doing that. You're so fantastic.
That's good. Well, thank you. And you know what, Bob, I want to say to you, thank you for helping me, because this is basically one of my first podcasts. I've done others with others, but this is first time for a podcast for me. And you're helping me on my role in Toastmasters and helping me along. And I so appreciate that support and insight in what I learned today. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Mona.